With all this talk about CBDCs and digital IDs lately, it really feels like we're on the verge of a massive shift in how we think about and use money.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic right now, and for good reason. The decisions being made today about these technologies could have major ripple effects on everything from how we shop to how our data is used.
It's not just about your stock portfolio anymore, is it? This is about the future of money itself, and you clearly sense that sending us all this research on the topic. You've been digging into articles and research papers, even that video by Whitney Webb. It seems you're especially interested in the data privacy angle, something you've brought up before with social media algorithms.
Absolutely. Remember that article you shared about how social media platforms use our data to target us with ads and curate our feeds? Imagine that level of granular insight, but applied to your financial transactions. That's the potential reality we're facing with CBDCs linked to digital IDs.
Okay, so let's break that down a bit. For those who are new to this whole thing, when we say CBDC, we're talking about central bank digital currencies. Essentially, it's digital money, but instead of it being issued by your bank, it's coming directly from the government.
Like a digital dollar bill, but with a digital footprint attached. Unlike cash, which is largely anonymous, a CBDC could be tracked from the moment it leaves the central bank to every single purchase it's used for.
So every cup of coffee, every book you buy online, meticulously logged and potentially analyzed. And that's where the digital IDs come in. At first glance, it might seem like a natural evolution, no more bulky wallets. You just scan your digital ID for all your identification and financial needs.
Sure, but that convenience can come at a cost. When you have one centralized ID that's linked to your financial life, your online activity, potentially even your health records, it raises some serious concerns about surveillance and control. Imagine a situation where access to essential services or government benefits is dependent on your digital footprint.
It's giving me some serious papers, please vibes, not exactly the free and open society we like to think we have, right? And speaking of which, one of the sources you sent, that video by Whitney Webb, used Nigeria's recent rollout of a CBDC as a cautionary tale.
Yeah, the eNaira, as it's called, is a real-world example of how these systems can be implemented in ways that raise some red flags about control and coercion.
From what I gathered, it wasn't exactly a smooth rollout, was it?
Not even close. The Nigerian government, in an effort to push people toward the eNaira, essentially made it harder to get physical cash, and that caused some serious pushback.
hmm
Many citizens rely on cash for their daily transactions, and they saw this as a blatant power grab.
That doesn't sound like financial inclusion to me. It's like they're using the idea of bringing more people into the system as a justification to exert more control over it.
Exactly. Proponents of CBDCs often talk about their potential for things like banking the unbanked. But the situation in Nigeria shows how these systems can actually be used in ways that make existing inequalities worse and erode trust in institutions.
It's like handing someone a shiny new lock for their door, but then also giving yourself the only key. It might seem like a good deal at first, but it all depends on who's holding the keys, right?
Absolutely. And to complicate things even further, it's not always clear who's holding all the keys in this situation. While governments are the ones issuing these currencies and setting the initial rules, they often rely heavily on partnerships with private companies to design, implement, and manage these complex systems.
So it's not just about governments controlling our money, it's about the increasing influence of big tech and these massive financial institutions. They're the ones building the infrastructure, managing the data, influencing the rules of the game. This whole public-private partnership angle really stood out in Whitney Webb's video, too.
Yeah, it's a crucial piece of the puzzle that doesn't get enough attention. We tend to frame the conversation as this battle between governments and individual freedom, but the reality is much more nuanced. These private companies are deeply involved in building the infrastructure, developing the technology, even influencing the regulations.
So it's not just Big Brother watching over our financial lives. It's more like Big Brother Incorporated, right? Those lines between government oversight and corporate control are getting really blurry.
Exactly, and that raises a whole other set of questions about accountability, transparency, potential conflicts of interest.
Uh,
Who benefits most from this shift towards a cashless, digitally tracked society?
It's a question worth thinking about. We've covered a lot of ground already, but it's important to remember that this isn't just some abstract idea or some futuristic concept. The foundation is being laid right now. The decisions that are being made today about how this technology is developed and implemented are going to have lasting consequences.
Definitely. As we delve deeper into the potential implications for your financial future, your privacy, your freedom, it's important to remember that the future is not set in stone. The choices we make today will determine what that future looks like.
And that's what we'll be exploring further when we come back for part 2 of this deep dive.
So we left off talking about this whole dance between governments and tech companies.
Right. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, I want to bring it back to everyday life. How could this impact, just your average person going about their day? Say, someone grabbing groceries on a Tuesday afternoon.
Okay, so picture this. It's Tuesday, you're at the checkout, but instead of paying with cash or card, you use your digital ID, which is seamlessly linked to your CBDC account. Easy, right?
Seems pretty straightforward.
But here's the thing. Every single purchase you make, from that carton of milk to the pack of gum, is recorded and logged in a central system.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. It's not just about convenience anymore, is it?
Exactly. It's about what happens when those seemingly mundane purchases are analyzed, categorized, potentially even judged.
So instead of getting targeted ads for shoes, I might get flagged for buying too many bags of chips.
It's not that far-fetched. Think about it. Proponents argue that this data would be anonymized and used to prevent fraud, offer personalized services. But you have to wonder who gets to set the standards for what constitutes acceptable spending habits.
It's giving me some serious food police vibes.
Right. And let's not forget about the security aspect. If your wallet gets stolen, you cancel your cards, life goes on. But in a fully digital system, if your digital ID is compromised, your entire financial life could be on the line.
It's like putting all your eggs in one very fragile basket, which I guess brings us back to those power dynamics we were talking about.
Exactly. Who do we trust to safeguard that basket? Governments, tech giants. It's not an easy question to answer.
Especially after cases like Nigeria, where the government basically forced people to adopt the eNaira by limiting access to physical cash.
Right. It's a prime example of how a central authority can exert control in this new digital financial system.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, we have these massive tech companies who are building the infrastructure, managing the data, essentially writing the rules of the game.
It's like those too big to fail banks, but on a whole other level.
And the lines between those two worlds, the governments and the tech giants, they're getting blurrier all the time. We see former government officials taking on roles at these tech companies, lobbyists shaping regulations. It's all connected.
It's all starting to feel very interconnected, isn't it? The digital currencies, the digital IDs, the data tracking. It's like we're putting together this giant puzzle and we're only just starting to see what the picture looks like.
And that's the question we need to be asking ourselves. What does that picture look like? What are we willing to risk? What are the trade-offs in exchange for convenience or so-called progress?
It's the million-dollar question, and I don't think anyone has a good answer yet. But it's something we need to be thinking about now, while we still have some say in how this all plays out.
I agree. The future isn't predetermined. It's being shaped by the decisions we make today.
So where do we go from here? I mean, you've presented a lot of information, some of it pretty overwhelming, to be honest. What can the average person, someone who maybe hasn't gone down this rabbit hole of research, do?
It's easy to feel powerless, but just being aware is a huge first step. Don't shy away from these topics just because they seem complicated. The more you understand how this technology works, the potential implications, the better prepared you'll be to engage in meaningful conversations and actually advocate for the kind of future you want to see.
Knowledge is power, right? But it's not enough to just have it. We need to use it.
Absolutely. Talk to your friends, family, colleagues about this. Share what you're learning, ask questions, and encourage others to do the same. The more people who are aware of what's at stake, the better chance we have of shaping a future that prioritizes our freedom and autonomy.
It's about raising awareness, making sure these decisions are made with transparency, not just behind closed doors.
Exactly.
Before we move on, any other key takeaways from your research that you think are important?
One thing that really stood out to me was how often these technologies, the CBDCs and digital IDs, are presented in such a positive light.
You mean like this idea that it's going to increase financial inclusion or make our lives easier?
Exactly. And while those things might be true to some extent, we need to be careful about just accepting these promises without question. Every technological advancement comes with its own set of trade-offs.
So don't just focus on the good, look at the potential downsides too.
Right. Don't be afraid to ask critical questions. And most importantly, trust your gut. If something feels off, dig a little deeper.
Trust your gut. I like it. We've covered a lot of ground: digital currencies, digital IDs, data tracking. It's a lot.
It is, but these are important conversations to be having. The more we engage with these topics, the better equipped we'll be to face the challenges and hopefully shape a better future.
And that brings us to the heart of it all. What does this mean for you, the listener? What can you do? We'll explore those questions when we come back for the final part of this deep dive. We've spent the last two parts really digging into the what of CBDCs and digital IDs, but now I think it's time to talk about what this means for you listening right now in the years to come.
That's the question, isn't it? And the truth is, the impact of all of this really depends on how these technologies are implemented and the choices we make individually and collectively.
So let's break it down. If we're talking about tangible changes in your life, what should people be prepared for?
Well, on a practical level, I think we could see a gradual move away from physical cash. I mean, we're already seeing that trend in a lot of places with card payments and mobile transactions.
Right, like how some businesses stopped accepting cash entirely during the pandemic.
Exactly. And while convenience and hygiene were definitely factors in those decisions, we have to remember there's often a trade-off. In this case, it's the potential trade-off between convenience and privacy. When every transaction is digital, every cup of coffee, every pack of gum, it creates a data trail. And as we've talked about, that data can be used in ways that we might not expect or want.
So less cash in my pocket could mean more data points in someone else's file about me.
That's essentially it. And it's not just about tracking your purchases either. Think about all the other data that could be tied to your digital identity, your location, your browsing history, even your social media activity.
Okay, now you're just starting to freak me out a little bit. I'm starting to get flashbacks to that article you sent about China's social credit system. Are we really
Right.
talking about that level of control here?
Well, it's not a direct comparison, but it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility either. Imagine a scenario where your digital footprint is used to assess your eligibility for certain services or benefits.
So instead of a credit score, it's like a citizen score based on your digital activity.
It's not that far off, right? Imagine if your access to healthcare or even government assistance was based on whether you're making what they deem to be the right choices based on your digital footprint. Are you buying healthy foods? Are you staying within certain spending limits? Are you following the rules? It's a lot of power to hand over to whoever's controlling the algorithms.
And let's be honest, those algorithms aren't always going to be fair or unbiased. So what can we do? It's easy to feel powerless when you're up against systems this big.
I get it, it can feel really overwhelming, but that's why awareness is so important. Start by educating yourself. Read articles, listen to podcasts just like this, and talk to people about it.
Don't just passively accept the technology that's being developed, right? Be an active participant in shaping how it's used.
Exactly. Support organizations that are fighting for digital rights and privacy. Think critically about the information you come across online. And most importantly, don't be afraid to speak up.
Speak up and demand more transparency and accountability from the institutions that are building and implementing this technology. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the world of CBDCs, digital IDs, and the future of money. It's a complex and rapidly evolving landscape, and we've only just scratched the surface. But we hope this conversation has given you some things to think about, some questions to ask, and maybe even a little bit of hope. Because at the end of the day, the future isn't something that just happens to us, it's something that we create. So let's make it a good one.